Agitorium nostrum in nomine Domini. We continue with the life of St. Patrick in the church history. So we ended last time with the great Pope. What Pope?
Pope Leo the First.
Yeah, Leo the Great. Yes. We left off with him. Pope Leo the First, the Great, was one of those mighty men sent by the Holy Ghost to rule the church in moments of her direst need. When the weak Emperor Theodosius II assembled a packed and illegal council at Ephesus, where decayed palace bishops, amid disgraceful scenes of turbulence and dishonesty, whitewashed the heresy of Eutyches and condemned St. Flavian for daring to oppose it. So here's another case of an unjust condemnation of St. Flavian. And the bishops siding with heresy. And where was that fake council?
Ephesus?
Ephesus, yes. So here's another occasion of bishops siding with heresy for the sake of comfort and ease. Pope Leo called them a band of robbers, latrocinium. Latro is a thief in Latin. He declared their acts null and void and set the record straight in the lawful General Council of Chalcedon. So the Great Council of Chalcedon. Chalcedon.
What year is this, Father?
Chalcedon. I'll have to check. This is 400s.
441 was when he went to Rome to meet Pope Leo. Around 441.
Okay, Council of Chalcedon. With Pope Leo the First. In the year 451 AD, which defined Christ as one person with two natures against the heresies of Eutyches. All right. He, quote, "Leave to the bishops the liberty of defending the faith," he wrote to the emperor. "No powers or terrors of the world will ever be able to destroy it. Protect the church and seek to preserve the peace, that Christ may protect your empire." So what is this teaching? What is Pope Leo I teaching the Emperor Theodosius II? The principles of
Church and state?
relations, yes. Church, profess the faith, take care of the church, protect the church, profess the faith, seek peace, and Christ will bless your empire. That is the basic teaching on the church and state. And Pope Leo XIII is just going to re-emphasize all this.
I'm sorry, Father, who was he speaking to there? Emperor
Theodosius.
Yeah.
It's Theodosius II. And here's the great event with Pope Leo. When Attila the Hun, so you can picture Attila the Hun, how would you picture him? Well, the helmet with two horns, like the Vikings. Maybe wrapped in some bear skin, or bare-chested, with leather belts, swords, boots, rough beard. Right? When Attila the Hun was advancing on Rome, Pope Leo the Great went to meet him at Ravenna and obtained from him a promise to spare the city. And he persuaded even Genseric and his Vandals to be content with its plunder. So Pope Leo, not hiding in the papal palace, but going out on his horse, went to face Attila the Hun. That's a good pope. And in St. Peter's Basilica, someday you'll see this, there's a huge, it's not a painting, it's a relief. It's kind of it's a relief. And you can see Pope Leo I going out to meet Attila. And Attila, with all his armies, sees the Pope coming with his horse and some of the cardinals. And above them, they see St. Peter and Paul with swords ready to swing in vengeance. So some say that's what Attila saw. St. Peter and Paul and angels. And he feared. And the Pope told him, do not come to Rome. Turn around. Pope Leo established far higher standards for the priesthood. Here's a footnote. Among other things, the canons of Pope Leo put an end to the election of priests by popular clamor, which had become an abuse. He is said to have done this after a vision in which the apostle St. Peter told him that all his sins were forgiven except those committed in conferring holy orders. So they were electing to be ordained the wrong type of men. He enhanced the prestige of the See of Peter in many ways, notably by resisting the attempts of the Patriarch of Constantinople, Anatolius, Patriarch of Constantinople. So where is that?
In modern day Turkey.
That's correct. So Patriarch Anatolius. So this is the old friction between the Eastern Empire, Byzantium, and Rome. There's always been that friction. And you see it pop up all the time in the history of the church. He resisted the attempts of the Patriarch of Constantinople, Anatolius, to steal the primacy under the sly title of universal bishop for the greater glory of the emperor in Byzantium, and to reduce the pope to something like an imperial chaplain. So you see already here, the Patriarch is trying to steal the name universal bishop. And who alone does that refer to? The Pope. So Pope Leo caught him on his chess move and checked him off the boards. Pope Leo I stood firm as a rock. Had he failed to do so, all history would have been different, and the magnificence of the medieval Christian culture would have been impossible. Such was the Bishop of Rome, to whom St. Patrick had recourse. How interesting it would be to have an account of the meeting of these two spiritual giants. St. Patrick meeting the great Pope Leo the Great. And there's many great sermons in the breviary from Pope St. Leo the Great, especially the one on Easter night during Christmas. There's some great sermons. He's the one that says, Agnosio Christiane, dignitatem tuam. Recognize, O Catholic, recognize your dignity, that you are made participators in the very life of God. By what?
Sacrifice.
Yes. But St. Patrick's biographer, Tyrtacan, tells little of this event except when he went with a priest named Father Sacellus. He received the Pope's approval of his mission and the confirmation of his episcopate, and brought back some relics of saints, Peter and Paul, to enshrine in the churches of Ireland. With these treasures, and no doubt with a lighter heart, St. Patrick returned to face his enemies in Ireland. Who are among some of the enemies of St. Patrick in Ireland?
Well, the Druids.
The Druids, yeah. Because they're involved with some child sacrifice, they're involved with witchcraft, Satan worship, right?
I think some of the bishops didn't like, not in Ireland, but some of the bishops didn't like him either.
Very probably, yeah, very probably. Chapter 3, Patrick the Emancipator. It is a rosy but false tradition that has St. Patrick making a sort of grand tour of the Emerald Isle to receive the ecstatic homage of a pious people. To say nothing of physical hardships, which were second only, perhaps, to those of St. Paul. He was followed everywhere, despite the permission of Loher to preach, by the open or secret malice of powerful adversaries. So it wasn't a walk in the park for St. Patrick. It was tough. He was constantly facing the uprisings of the devil's instigations and enemies, and the Druids. At the outset, a Druid tried to poison him. In Leinster, that's L-E-I-N, Leinster. In Leinster, a pagan swore to kill him for the overthrowing of Crom, C-R-O-M-M, and might have done so but for the self-sacrifice of St. Patrick's charioteer, Odain, who, learning of the plot to kill him, changed seats with his master and took through his heart the spear thrown from ambush near Tullamore. Tullamore Dew, where the whiskey's made. So it was near they tried to kill St. Patrick. So this heroic charioteer, the chariot driver, Odain, protected St. Patrick. He gave his life for him. That's heroic. So remember that whenever you drink Tullamore Dew. The heroism of Odain, who took his seat and took the spear to the heart. But St. Patrick never knew fear. There must have been some solid foundation for the countless stories told to illustrate his courage. When a merciless man named Brennan, oh, Michael, your name is Brennan. Maybe you related to this guy. Brennan. B-R-E-N, one N. A-I-N-N. Brennan. That's one word. So, Michael, you might be related to this Brennan.
I don't think that's a good thing.
When a merciless man named Brennan, for example, resisted him at Athmain in Assal, he marked a cross on a flagstone with the spike of his crozier, saying, "If I were not patient with you, the might of God's power would cleave thee as the crozier cleft the stone." So, that's from the Tripart Life of St. Patrick, Volume 1, page 133. So if I were not patient with thee, Brennan, the might of God's power would cleave thee as the crozier cleft this stone. 9 wizards who sought to slay him were believed to have been consumed by fire from heaven. A certain Angus, who had been baptized without believing, came to him drunk and mocked him. What, a drunk Irishman? That's strange. Anyway, he came in drunk and mocked St. Patrick. My God's doom, said Patrick, using his favorite exclamation. It were right that thy dwellings and thy children after thee should not be exalted. Thy successors will be ale-bibbers, that is, heavy drinkers, and they will be parricides through thee. What's a parricide, anybody? Parricide. What's parricide?
Pesticide or parasite?
Parricide. Chide means to kill. The parricide is one who kills his father. Matricide is to kill the mother. So his successors, St. Patrick, will be said, your successors will be drunkards, ale-bibbers, and parricides. To another foe, Durbal, son of Aed, who challenged him to move a mountain, St. Patrick retorted, There will not be till doomsday is the judgment day, either king or bishop of thy race. And it shall be lawful for men of Munster to peel you always, every 7th year, like an onion. Wow. Once he sent for the king of the Deisi, Ferger, son of Ross, who, to insult St. Patrick, deliberately put off coming. When at last he appeared, the bishop, St. Patrick, said, Thou hast come slowly. The country is very stiff, replied the king by way of excuse. True indeed, quoted St. Patrick, there shall never be a king from thee, and what is it delayed thee today? Rain delayed us, said the king. Your folk motes shall always be showery, observed St. Patrick dryly. And so it came to pass, folk motes were never held by the Deisi except at night. Whatever folk motes are. There was no taint of Arian compromise or of common ground Catholicism in this apostle. Though he knew that God had made all men, he insisted, as true Catholics always have, that the only children of God in a spiritual sense are those who accept his one true church with the complete and childlike faith he demanded. St. Patrick called those who believed him sons of life, and those who opposed him he called sons of death. So those who became Catholic were called sons of life. Those who refused to become Catholic, sons of death. Isn't that honest? One of these sons of death, a murderer and thief called Mackkill. So here's the Gaelic, Maccuill, and in the modern English it would be McKill. M small c Q capital Q Uill. One of these sons of death, a murderer and a thief called McKill, decided to make a spectacle of the adze head, or shaveling, who was turning Ireland upside down. Remember, they called him adze head, St. Patrick. He got a man of his household, one named Garvin, Garvan, to pretend to be dead. They put a mantle over his body and said piously to St. Patrick, Heal our comrade for us, and make prayer to the Lord that he may raise him to life out of death. So they're setting St. Patrick up to mock him, right? They're just going to say, oh, he wasn't dead in the first place. So you're phony miracles. My God's doom, said St. Patrick, turning away casually. He certainly is dead. Dead as a tombstone was Garvin when they took the mantle off him. This made such an impression on McKill that he straightway asked to be baptized, and giving up his old way of life, went to dwell as a hermit on the Isle of Man. After his ordination as a priest, the Manx-men chose him as their bishop. He is honored by the church as Saint McKill, or Macalius. Footnote, the medieval chronicle adds that St. Patrick restored Garvin to life. A similar story is told about St. Martin of Tours. So, interesting. For one named Echaid, Echaid, all these strange Gaelic names, who tried to force two girls, virgins for the sake of Christ, to worship idols and to marry, St. Patrick predicted the violent end that soon overtook him. All this sort of opposition, which might be called routine, he met with firmness, sometimes with a sort of sly irony. More difficult to accept was the hostility and misunderstanding of his fellow Christians. Almost every saint has had as the crown of his earthly sorrows the inexplicable trial known in hagiography as persecution by the good. Can anybody name some saints who were persecuted by the good people? Whether it be popes, bishops, priests, fellow domestics of the faith.
St. John Bosco.
Persecuted by?
He was persecuted by, I believe it was the bishop.
Yeah, the bishop did put him through some torments, yes.
I think, I'm probably going to get the name wrong, but I think it's St. William of Windsor, or Winchester, I don't remember. But he was persecuted by St. Bernard Clairvaux, by the Pope, by almost every single bishop. And actually, St. Bernard Clairvaux, St. William was a very saintly bishop. But rumors spread about that he was very immoral, very sensual and whatnot. St. Bernard of Clairvaux actually believed them. So, for a time, the reigning pope was in favor of St. William. But then that pope died, and St. Bernard got one of his monks to become pope, because that monk was already a cardinal. So he became pope, and St. Bernard told him everything he knew about St. William. And then that pope condemned St. William, and St. Bernard even wrote in a letter to that pope that it is our mission to root out this evil tree that happens to be in the Lord's garden. So, and St. William, he died, of course, embracing it all with patience, but his name wasn't cleared up until after his death.
Wow. Who's another one?
St. Therese was persecuted by a lot of the nuns in the convent.
Yeah, so was St. Bernadette.
Yes.
So was St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. Yeah, she was very, very mistreated by her sisters.
Children of Fatima?
The children of Fatima are arrested and threatened death by the mayor of Arem, yeah, the Freemasons. There's another one who was sentenced to be burned alive.
St. Joan of Arc.
Yeah, by Catholic bishops. So yes, so this is a cross many saints have to deal with. Archbishop Lefebvre being unjustly excommunicated and suspended by the Pope. These modernist popes. All right? Apparently the antipathy, which at first prevented his being sent to Ireland, still smoldered among certain of the clergy in Britain and Gaul, particularly among those lordly rhetoricians, of whom he speaks with some disdain in his confession. So what are these lordly rhetoricians? Bishops full of hot air that don't say anything. That's what he's talking about. He would really call the modernists lordly rhetoricians. They say a lot, but don't say anything. Right? It was whispered about that he was only a rustic. St. Patrick was an ex-slave whose Latin was rather crude, that he was not validly a bishop, that he was interested only in the gifts and collections he could get out of the Irish people. Possibly some of these slanders reached Rome. The need of refuting them may have been one reason for St. Patrick's visit there in 441. With what pope?
Pope Leo I.
That's right. So he suffered false accusations. So, especially in this line of battle, with the Catholic resistance, you're going to get shot at as a priest. You're going to get shot at. So you get used to that and stay close to Our Lady. You'll be called a sedevacantist, you'll be called a compromiser, you'll be called, who knows,
Not even remotely Catholic.
not even remotely Catholic. Yeah, you'll be called all kinds of names. So that just comes with the territory. And it shouldn't bother us too much as long as we stay right before God, our heart right before God, and seek His glory. Things went better at any rate after his return to Ireland. The following year, Pope Leo I sent him 3 assistants, and the fact that all 3 were holy bishops and able administrators, who were Saints Secundinus, Saint Auxilius, and Saint Iserninus. There's some difficult names. Saint Secundinus. So these were the 3 bishops sent to help St. Patrick. Oh, I wish he could send us one. Saint Auxilius and Saint Iserninus. Iserninus, how do you pronounce that? I don't know. Saint Iserninus, Saint Iserninus. So these 3 bishops sent by the Pope indicates the importance how attached to the mission in Ireland and to St. Patrick's position as its metropolitan. All 3 of these bishops had been brethren of his in the monastery at Auxerre under Saints Amator and Saint Germanus. So they were old friends. So that must have been a great joy for St. Patrick to have old friends from the monastery now as bishops helping him. Maybe they were studying together, maybe they were priests together. Saint Secundinus, a poet, a Lombard by birth, then about 70 years of age, set up his see at Dunshalin, 5 miles from Tara. Saint Auxilius went to Kilossie, and Saint Iserninus to Aghad on the river Slaney. St. Patrick himself now established his metropolitan chair at, anybody guess? Where did St. Patrick set up his chair in Ireland?
In Dublin?
Good guess, but no, it starts with an A. Can you pronounce that?
Armagh?
Armagh, yeah. In the wilds of Ulster, 2 miles from tragic Emania, where in old times the sons of Usna died and lovely Deirdre leapt to death. There St. Patrick raised a new shrine which he called the Church of the Martyrs, placing in the altar stone the relics of Saints Peter and Paul, which Pope Leo I had given him in Rome. There has been much speculation as to why he chose Armagh instead of the royal capital, Tara. De Blackam's conjecture that he did so to avoid political interference, so hampering or corrupting to some of the bishops of the continent, may be the correct conjecture. So to avoid political problems, perhaps. Ireland never had a dispute over investitures such as plagued the church in England, Spain, and other countries. It was St. Patrick who laid the strong foundations of Irish monasticism. He established so many monasteries and convents, in fact, that he has been accused of relegating the hierarchical government of the church to second place. It is more likely that being both monk and bishop, he was well aware of the complementary relationship between the two. And in this he anticipated on a far smaller scale the world-changing mysteries of Pope Gregory the Great. He had already seen in Gaul how monastic training could raise the standards of the episcopacy, and how necessary, on the other hand, was supervision by bishops to maintain discipline among monks. Before his death, St. Patrick set up almost 50 episcopal sees in various parts of Ireland, He also established the first of the famous Irish monastic houses that were to contribute so much to the reform and development of Europe, to the creation, in fact, of medieval culture. So, often in Europe you will see the main church, right, the main church, and then you will often see attached to it will be a cloister, a big square cloister, an extension of the monastery. So the monks live the monastic life near the cathedral, near the big church, which shows the union of active and contemplative life. So in Durham, the church in England, you have that. You have the beautiful medieval church built in the 1000s, and then attached to it is the huge cloister where they lived as monks. You see that in Rome as well. So that's what St. Patrick brought to Ireland, was the union of the active and contemplative life. Very important. So when the Archbishop Lefebvre set up the SSPX, it's a little model of after that. The priests live in priories, and they're also active. So they keep the union of contemplative life and active life, which St. Thomas Aquinas says in the final run is the highest life. Contemplative is higher in one way, but to preach and to give what you contemplate is higher than that, because it's a work of charity, says St. Thomas. So in the Psalm says, out of my mouth a fire rose up. Out of my meditation a fire rose up. So in prayer, God inspires. So the union of church, the union of contemplative life and active life, which St. Patrick established throughout all of Ireland. Although St. Patrick was now over 60 years old, he was far from resting on his laurels. Whatever his rivals in Britain might think of him, the Irish everywhere, with certain sour exceptions, loved and venerated St. Patrick. Some of the characteristics they prized in him are evident in a biographical hymn written in his honor by the poet Fiach. Fiach, F-I-A-C-C. The Gaelic couplets of this bard may not be the best, for we are told that he took the tonsure rather than let his master, the chief poet of the country, accept it, to the injury of the art most highly esteemed in Ireland. Yet it conveys a warm and moving tribute to the fasting of St. Patrick, his visions, his courage, his lack of pride and vainglory, and his disregard for personal inconvenience, which led him to sleep habitually on a flagstone, wrapped in a wet mantle, with only a stone for his pillow. Another curious hymn is attributed to Bishop Saint Secundinus, or as he was called in Gaelic, Secnal. Various reasons for his writing it were invented by later chroniclers. One was that Secnal had offended St. Patrick by criticizing his preaching and wanted to make amends. Knowing that he would not listen to his own praise, he asked if he cared to hear a eulogy for a certain son of life. My welcome to the praise of God's household, said St. Patrick a little tartly. And then Bishop Secnal, Bishop Secundinus, then read his 23 quatrains of Latin dactylic pentameter, omitting the first in which the name of Patrick occurred. The Archbishop listened with evident pleasure to the account of one who kept Christ's commands in all things, who was constant in the love of God and immovable in faith. One, quote, whom God sent, like St. Paul, to apostles as apostles to the Gentiles. One who, quote, keeps his flesh chaste for the love of God. One who, quote, spurns every glory of the world for the divine law. The good and faithful shepherd of the flock of the gospel, whom God has chosen to guard his people of God. Yes, the verses were beautiful, and St. Patrick liked them even when he learned they were for him. Bishop Secknall asked what reward he was to have. Thanks. Thou shalt have for composing the hymn a number of sinners' souls to go to heaven, the same as the number of days that there are in a year. I will not take that, said Bishop Secknall, for I deem that little, and the eulogy is good. Thou shalt have this for the hymn, the number of hairs that are on the chasuble of thy cowl, their number of sinners to go to heaven. I will not take it, for what believer, without praising at all a man like thee, will not take with him as many as that to heaven? Thou shalt have of the sinners of Ireland 7 every Thursday, and 12 every Saturday to go to heaven. It is little, said Secknall. Then thou shalt thou have every one who shall sing it on lying down and rising up. I will not take that, for the hymn is long, and not every one will be able to remember it, said the Bishop Secknall. All its grace shall be on the last 3 chapters of it, said St. Patrick, with the sly humor characteristic of him. Thanks be to God, said the Bishop Secknall. This is the first hymn that was made in Ireland, wrote an early commentator. It is in alphabetical order, after the manner of the Hebrews, but not throughout. All right, well, we'll talk more about that hymn of Secknall later. Agitorium nostrum in nomine Domini.